I want to first of all thank the United Way Acton-Boxborough for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is truly a exciting time to be on this planet. So many things have happened that are very troubling, and as they are now. But I feel that we are on a pathway to healing in dynamic ways. And one of the things I emphasize to people is that all the things that are happening now are new. We've never been here before. And I'm going to get to quite a bit of that as we go through this talk. But I just want to sincerely thank all of you for being here and taking this time to listen to me, and I thank you all for inviting me. And I ask that you please keep an open mind, and as I share some of the things that may be hard to listen to, but if you hang in there, I promise you we'll get to a better place. So, with that, one of the real treats about being here in Acton, I don't know too much about the town per se, as it's the infrastructure and things like that, but what I do know is this is part of the traditional homelands of my people who have been here for thousands of years. And the Nipmuc home is quite extensive, covering 4 states, and I'll share a little bit of that in a moment. So the proper way to respect this land and the space and the water and the trees that are growing here and the way the wind blows and the way the sun sets on the horizons and the way the mountains form is to recognize the original language. And so to remember the land, to those words that were spoken here for thousands of years before English. And so we say in Nipmuc on this land is Unashao Natumo Manatu, Tabatni, Watu Chikinisen, Okumis, Tabatni Wuchi Sapasu, Usakati Hona, Notas Ninuamanantiok, King Nuta Yu Kantaminok, and a male Ninuan me Quantam Kichia, Ka Mata Wananta, Ka Nagwatie Kukutam Ninua, Manitou, Usakati Hona, Womanita Dio, Ka Nosokomuso Amoke, Ninoho, Kakanto Chokesich, Niayo. The body Manitou, Niwichi, I am United Way. I greet you in the words of peace and reciprocity in the Nipmuc language, and there are no exact translations, as our Algonquin language they are verb-orientated, and English is noun-orientated, so it's all about the physicalities of spirit, of being, of doing. And so one of the things I express is that I ask that we share in a good way, that we share each other's breath. Sounds funny in English, but really what it means, if we interpret that, it means sharing our spirit. And the translation is breath, because in our language, when you're breathing, you are sharing your spirit. And I challenge anybody to hold your breath, and you'll find out quick your spirit's leaving you. So it's so when we speak, we're sharing our spirit. Every word is sharing our spirit, because it's our breath, it's our living life force. And I talked about our ancestors, that they could share this space with us and be in this room in a good way. And I also was grateful for the United Way, who are on this land, and I'm welcoming them with my ancestors here, and all of you to share in this space, and that we can come to a better understanding of each other, to have some healing and have some understanding, so we can all move forward in a good way. And with that, we like to open up with a song. And one of the things you may have heard before about the drum, or maybe you have not, that the drum is the heartbeat of our people. And the most amazing thing about the drum is that when you listen to that beat and we say heartbeat, I'm going to share with you why that is not abstract. So I would ask everybody to look to the person to your left. Your other left, sir. And now look to the person to your right. Okay, you can look this way now, please. Now One of the things you may have noticed is that the person that you took notice of may not have the same complexion of skin, they may not be the same gender, they may not have the same type of hair, they may not have no hair, but what we recognize when we talk about the heartbeat of the drum is that everybody, every human being and every living thing, from a blade of grass to a tree, has a heartbeat. And you say, heartbeat, yes, because it's all just vibrations, everything. We're the science folks in here. They know what I'm talking about. Everything, we're all just vibrations, vibrating in this big cosmic, still trying to figure that part out. But every living thing has a heartbeat, and when we look at that heartbeat, we begin to see a new understanding, and all this stuff of externalism that we deal with in terms of, well, they don't speak the way I do, they don't look the way I do, all that just melts away when we realize they're all vibrating just like we are. So, we sing this song. I'm going to go through some slides, probably rather expeditiously, because, let me see, I don't like to stand still. Adult ADD. Ooh, I gotta go. So yeah, I won't spend too much time on them, but the best thing to say about these slides is I encourage folks to dig deeper, because the things that I'm sharing are not, they're not in our school system. They're in the archives. They're in the Massachusetts State Archives. They're in the bottom basement of the libraries. They're in the records of places that nobody wants to talk about. And so it takes a little digging to find out this information. And thankfully it's coming to surface now through our many scholars, Native and non-Native, who are doing the tough work, and doing the scholarship. It's going to be a journey into the culture of this area, and again, I can just briefly touch on some things. I think the first thing to talk about is me. As you mentioned, I've been an artist for all of my adult life, speaking in front of folks and sharing and teaching. And it started out as a passion of mine since I was a child, growing up with the many traumas of being an Indigenous person in Massachusetts. And I think I was just born to be a poet from all the tragedy around me. You know, we say that jokingly, but usually the best poets are usually ones who've gone through so much, and because we can reflect back out onto the world the way we like things to be. As you mentioned, I did struggle with addiction as a youth because of many of the things. And I love to share that story, especially with young folks and people who are overcoming things. And I don't have time to get too much into that, but I think I will tell the main part about that is that by the time I was 21 years old, I was near death. And a lot of the issues that I had growing up was because I didn't know where I fit in on my own homeland, because of the abuse by the schools, by the people all around me. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and it was a tough time for many folks. And so it was quite the struggle. And so fast forward to that day when I had that awakening. I was in the hospital with IVs and alcohol poisoning or something like that. And I always loved to watch television, and I was very, inquisitive young man. I loved the science and astronomy. I loved the stars. And so naturally I had the TV on channel on PBS. Sesame Street wasn't on. So it was a documentary about none other than Christopher Columbus. And for the first time, it was 1990, I watched this documentary with Ernest about Christopher Columbus, and the narrator started talking about how the Europeans brought alcohol to the indigenous people and summarily usurped their land, annihilated their communities with this substance because they've never had it before. As a very indigenous people have a low tolerance for it. So they literally destroyed themselves and were taken advantage of, and even till today, which I'll go into some very dismal numbers around that. And when I watched that, I was so moved by that. I was so just jarred to the core. When I was dismissed from the hospital, I walked out the doors and I never drank again after that. And I know that for those who choose to believe what they believe, the Great Spirit, as we say, Manitou, he saved me to do what I'm doing now for these last 3 decades, because I wasn't even meant to be here. And so many I've watched, older and younger, not survive addiction. And as somebody who's worked in the field for all this time, we still don't have the answers of how to cure anybody or stop it. But what we do know, the best results are when we do prevention work. And I'll try to get into some of that there. Anyways, like I said, it's quite an extensive story to talk about. And I do enjoy talking about it, but I want to get to some of this material here. And as you see here, as I said, that was that changed my life. I began digging into my history and learning more from my elders who are still around, and began traveling the world. Here are some more recent photos of my work, maybe in the last 10 years or so. The top right picture is when I was spending some time, about a month and a half in Greenland with the Inuit children, and that was just a phenomenal experience I had. I also spent time in Iceland and Finland and Sweden, down there, up there in Skellefteå with the Sami people. So just amazing experiences there. Some of the other photos are in different tribal nations, like, I know this has a pointer, but if I hit something, I might shut the whole thing off. That's Forest County Potawatomi tribe. And below are some of the local libraries, because I am a storyteller. And I think in this society, when you hear that term storyteller, like, oh, okay, just get the kids. No, get the adults. They need to hear this stuff, because so, as an aside, we hear that word, the kids, it's time to play. We're going to have the kids playing. And then we forget that playing is the most intimate thing we can do at all ages. That's why you say, let's go play football. Let's go play bingo. Play. That's when your heart is at its most happiest, right, when you're playing. And so we think about the stories and we think about the healing. And in our language we say, Makwachakwan, as we call our children. They're called child gods. And it's really a metaphor because Anybody here have children? And I have a bunch of them too, yes. And we all know how hard it is to keep them safe from destroying themselves. And we spend all the time chasing them from going over cliffs, going into a fire. Like, why do they do that? Are they crazy? No, because they're Nipmuc. They're child gods, we call them in my culture. And the reason why we call them that is because they belong more to the spirit world than this world. They're not sure about this world yet, so they're not really interested in sticking around. They don't have an investment like we do. We're like, oh, I ain't going anywhere now. Oh, save me, give me some medicine, keep me around forever. But our children, and we try to keep them here because how we see, Nipmuc. So, but they're child spirits. That's what we say. So anyways, these are some of my different places I've traveled, and after 30 years, this is the busy time of year as well. I'm going to be speaking for the United something tomorrow with Trinidad, and so it's really exciting, and I don't have the notes in front of me, I forget the name of that place, but okay. And we're going to skip that slide, and we'll skip that for now. And I want to show you some of this here. When we think about Nipmuc people, my tribe, Nipmuc means people of the water or people of the fresh water. And here you see, the map there of the homeland. And as you see, as I mentioned, it's quite extensive. It goes into 4 states, all of central Massachusetts, we conquered the river up there around there somewhere, down in northern Rhode Island, big part of northern Connecticut, and all the way up to the tip of New Hampshire. And so in Massachusetts alone, the homeland stretched over 2,000 square miles. And that's just in Massachusetts. We don't have the numbers for the other states. But by the time of colonization, we were down to 5 acres of land. Wars, disease, usurping, stealing, some of that stuff I was telling you about earlier, the alcohol deals, get them drunk and have them put their ex here kind of thing. There's a lot of that going on. But we're working on that. We're getting that land back. And this is what I like to share too here. And as a scholar myself, in all these decades, one thing we know quite a bit about our ancestors through culture, through academia, through science, through the different disciplines of study that we have, archaeology and so on and so forth. So we've learned a lot. But what's fascinating is more so, and probably as well as sad, is that there's still so much we don't know. For example, the numbers of folks who were here, Indigenous people pre-colonial times, and the amount of time continues to go back. The numbers continue to go larger, and the time frame continues to recede. So, but for today's exercise, we're going to go with these numbers, and we're just talking about the continental United States right now. Pre-contact, talking about how many people were here. There was an estimate between 18 to 20 million folks. And I would say, given the information we have now, those numbers are quite modest. By the 1900s, however, there were 250,000 people. Now, we know this is a good number because this was around the time when they began doing the census and counting Native people. Because wherever we were, they wanted to count us. And they made sure they knew where we were at all times. And so, 250,000 versus, we'll take the low number, 18 million. This is any history buffs here or folks who've studied world history, you'll know that if you do the math, this is the largest genocide that's ever taken place in the time since we've been recording history, anywhere in the world. And nobody talks about it. The largest, if you look at that, from 18 million to 250,000 people in a few hundred years. That's the largest genocide that's ever taken place. And here's the correlation. Between 1803 and 1912, 32 states were added to the Union. So as I said, every time a state is added, Native Americans are getting pushed out. And by the way, settler colonialism has been very good at pushing brown people in different locations around the world. whether it's India, Africa, and so on. They're good at rounding up folks and making them go where they don't want to go. And so when you think about the Nipmuc people, what happened here, the Trail of Tears, Bosque Redondo, researched that, what happened to the Navajo folks, who are essentially moved and then succinctly starved to death, primarily using techniques that they learned in Nazi Germany to do that to the folks. And today's Native population is about 6.8 million folks, and rising. Native people are having babies, yes they are. And so the number is rising. And it's really hard to hear this stuff for the first time. And so that's when I show him. That's my youngest, who's now 3 years old. That's Ohketeau. He's looking angry. Stop it. So I like to show the little ones and remind us why we're all here. So I shared a little bit about what happened, but we can dive a little deeper about where the Native people went. And one of the more horrific things, the insidious things that happened here was the residential and boarding schools that took place here. And I've traveled across college campuses, and many times folks, I mention a boarding school, they don't know what I'm talking about. They might think I'm talking about Andover, which is like it's a generic Hogwarts. Folks have been there. But no, these boarding schools were harsh places where Indigenous folks essentially went to die, where they went under a militarized form of Christianity and brutality. That is, some of the survivors who are still around today, the testimony is gut-wrenching, and I won't share that today. It was horrifying what they went through, what the U.S. government sanctioned and ordered and did along with the church. And as I said earlier, pardon me, I always like to drink a lot of water. That's my message today, to drink lots of water. It's good for you. Not that bottled stuff, and just drink it from the tap, as long as your tap is safe. I drink well water. All right, so as I was saying, the boarding schools. And again, I mentioned earlier, none of this information is abstract. Every Native American person alive is a descendant of somebody who experienced some of this trauma. And I showed these, you probably can't see it from back there, but I always like to share these documents with folks because I come from 3 generations of children who were taken from their parents. And the last child that was taken was my grandfather's oldest brother. My grandfather was born in 1906. His oldest brother, Arthur, was born in 1897. And when they came around, Arthur was just old enough to be taken away, and that's what happened to him. He wasn't returned to his family until he was 18. And my granddad just escaped it, so who knows if I'd even be here if he was taken. And so in these records that you're seeing here, you're looking at records of the prior generation of children, a girl and a boy who were taken. Neither of them survived. The boy was said to have drowned at age 12, and the girl, she just disappears. So imagine your daughter goes to school and she just disappears, and the teachers, they don't have any answers for you. And so with this truth and reconciliation, I was talking to my cousin Bernie, who does a lot of this, who dug up a lot of this history. Again, this is not something that you're going to find in the public. He's petitioning to ask, like, where did our relatives go? What were they treated like? And the different things like that. Where are the bodies, right? And so this is a real tragedy. I'm first generation college myself, and I was mentioning to somebody earlier how my folks grew up in the woods. They were all farmers. Nobody went to school because it wasn't safe. You know, I mean, we got issues in school now, but back then there were other issues if you were a Native person. So you stayed away. And so my mom, she's 82 years old. She ended up being a nurse, and back then it was different. I don't think she had to go to school to become a nurse, but she became a nurse to make a living. But she didn't go do much. I think she went to like 9th grade, and everybody before her, it's like, you work the farm, and you stayed away from folks, white people, because it was dangerous. Next to that, to kind of shift to go along with this, which makes it more hard to think about, is that another fact that we don't really learn is that Native American people are the highest enlisted in the U.S. military across all the branches. In other words, Native American people are joining the military more than any other group. We're only 1% of the U.S. population, but we're joining the military more than any other group per ratio of our numbers. And my family's no different. I'm a veteran. My oldest son, he's a veteran. He's presently in reserve, so he's still in. He recently returned from Japan. And going back a little further, talking about this document to the right, I have two ancestors that I know of, Christopher Vickers and Samson Hazard, who are Revolutionary War veterans. One from Rhode Island, one from Massachusetts. And so can I be a son of the revolution then? You think they'll let me in? Yeah, they forget we're around. But moving up a little bit, so the Civil War, Nipmuc people had over 40 men who went off to fight for the Union Army. I had so many uncles and cousins and 2 grandfathers there at the same time. Their father and son were there fighting. And I recently wrote a play. You can add that to my bio, playwright. And I did a play recently called Freedom in Season, about what you're looking at here, this document. So during that time of the Civil War, the Nipmuc people were not U.S. citizens. We're wards of the state. But there was promise for black folks. And so we wanted to join that fight. So if they can be free, maybe we could be free. And maybe this is going to be good for everybody. But it didn't work out that way for either of us. So during that time, my grandfather had died, and his son had to go back and tell his mom, because, as I said, one of them, he was injured and all that. But when he died, they confiscated the small children, put them in the schools and the farms, because around here in New England, what they did was they didn't always go to Carlisle or that boarding school that was in Vermont that closed down. They would send them to the farms because there was a lot of farmland here. So they would be what they call farmed out and sent off with a farming family and maybe live in a barn and treated any way they wanted because there was no recourse. And the girls would be servants sometimes to go off to the industrial school for girls. And these kids would disappear and they would be laborers at 6, 7 years old. That's what happened to my grandfather's oldest brother. He became a farm laborer. And so what you're looking at here is a document because he had the award, what do they call it? He was a trustee of my grandfather's land, much like Indians have trustees now. He was the award. So when he died, they took the land and the children because, remember, a woman can't own land, especially a Native woman, can't have the rights to land during this time. So he comes in and claims it for the state. And even to this day, those descendants are down there enjoying that land. This is in the Wabaquasit area of Connecticut that I shared with you, the Nipmuc homeland. And so systematically, a lot of Nipmuc land was confiscated this way during the war. As I said, think about 40 men from that small area to a community. I think we were down to about 2,000 souls at that time during the Revolution and antebellum. So this had devastating impacts on our community, where land, children, our most valuable resource, our kids being taken away and indoctrinated with, the color of their skin, their language is wrong, they're wrong, and we're seeing those effects today in many facets. And so I want folks to take a minute to look at that. And so here's the American dilemma that I see, and I've been pondering for since I was a young man, in my early 20s. And this is the gnawing question. And George Erasmus, a respected elder from Canada, said, "Where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. Where community is to be formed, common memory must be created. Now, I share with you some hard stuff that maybe some of you have never heard before. And there's many likely have gone similar stories. Indigenous people, black people, immigrants who come here have gone through different forms of discrimination, anti-Asian laws and different things like that. And so when we think about those stories, we have a myth of America, and then we have the shared and lived experience. We have a myth of discovered lands, God-chosen people, exceptionalism, freedom, opportunity, promised lands, manifest destiny, land of endless resources. And then, in contrast, we have genocide, stolen lands, enslavement, forced removals, mascots, cultural appropriation, internment camps, boarding schools, institutional racism, segregation, erasure from history, Jim Crow laws, children separated at our borders, and it goes on and on. Police brutality, we're trying to deal with that, Oh my goodness, what do? This is pretty rough. And I say to folks who are, let's just say I don't want to say they have blinders on, I don't want to see that, but I do want folks who don't see the realness of this, to kind of just reflect a little bit in terms of, you may not believe all that, but you got to believe other people believe it. And if it takes more for you to believe that, dig into the history and challenge yourself. Be willing to lean into the uncomfortability of your own friction, is what we like to tell folks. Because now, I'm 55 years old, and I'm seeing things that I never thought I'd live to see growing up what I did, where people can openly call you horrible things if you weren't white. But that doesn't happen so much anymore, right? I mean, social media would make you think it's like every day. But, and so looking at that, it would seem like things are hopeless. But I would argue it's far from that. When I travel across college campuses and I look at a room full of students, many times these places are full, and I'm seeing students from different parts of the world, different languages, right? Different complexions, and so on and so forth. And I'm like, wow, do you guys know that? Like when my mother was a kid, this couldn't happen? Do you realize how like special this is in terms of this is new? This is new. We didn't do this before in this country, right? I don't want you to feel like, wow, like this is whatever. No, it's not. It's a big deal. This country has come a long way from segregation to all those horrible things I mentioned. And so, if we came this far, we can keep going. And I believe we are. And I share this, despite all that, we are still here. That's my great-grandmother, Lucy Vickers. And to the left of her is some of the documentation, and I won't get too much into that, but the traditional medicines, the power of healing. And that's a document that was taken from the town clerk in Sturbridge, Mass. in 1936, where Grandma was reciting a story from her grandparents about how, because now you're going back into the 1800s, and so she's talking about how some of these white settlers had moved out to where they lived, and one of the little girls became ill, and they didn't know what to do. And her uncle, who was a medicine healer, went out there and did this remedy and healed the child. And she talks about that there. And so the power of healing is all around us, right? Good on time? Okay. And I promise you, I said we'd get to a better place. And I think we can. And when I mentioned that, I'm seeing things that I thought I'd never see. For example, the first all-native run Indigenous Cultural Center that I get to be the founder of. As an artist, I don't like to travel so much anymore, and I mean, I love all of you, right? But There's so many like 20s and 30s something, these young scholars who are so talented and they're brilliant and their vision is just blows my mind. And I said, you know what? I want you to go. You go and do this. You go and talk because I really dig what you're doing. And you got a lot of energy and I just want to sit down. I want to sit on the beach and eat ice cream while you just, So you look at these folks here, these are all folks from the Ohketeau Cultural Center. And what they're paddling is a traditional mashun. Folks know what a mashun is? Yes, he knows. And and through our cultural center, we were able to complete this task for the first time in centuries, primarily because of the funding and the opportunity that Ohketeau provided. And there's some of us there, Ohketeau, some of our staff members there. And some of the things that we're doing, culture, spirituality, place-based learning, arts and theater, music and poetry, youth outreach, public programming, workshops, environmental awareness, academics, health and wellness, residency programs, apprenticeships, housing for Native artists, allyships, and food sustainability are some of the things, all the things that we're doing there. And one of the big things I want to mention about this cultural center is that I want to say, and we talk about resilience and the strength of people coming together. And that's what the power of education, the power of believing in each other, allyship, because Ohketeau was here through allyship from the Double-Edged Theater. The Double-Edged Theater they originally started out in Boston, now they're out in Western Mass. They started off as a Jewish theater company, focusing on issues around the Holocaust and the women's rights around Israel. So they're a very powerful dance company. And they joined up with us and they wanted to share with us. And so it's quite the alliance that we have with them folks. And so I want folks to think about is that when we think about cultural arts institutions, as a director, I found out a few things in terms of how these organizations can operate, how they can continue going. And one of the big things that they need is allyship and support. White-run arts, museum, and culture institutions have a powerful source of funding. And I don't mean just grants and different things like that, because that's primarily how many of our organizations run, grants and different things like that. Funding from the state, federal, local, right? Mass Humanities and Ford Foundation and so on. But there's a more powerful source than that, individuals. That's how they thrive, that's how they survive. White-run arts and culture organizations get about 70 to 75% of their funding from everyday people, whether somebody's offering $1 or $2. And so if you have a town of 50,000 people, and just 30,000 were given $1, that's $30,000 of operational funds that they have a year, right? And so when the grant money dries up, they're gonna go no matter what, because the community is invested in them. And so my big thing today is to underscore how we need to invest in Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous culture. I shared with you some of the most horrific things that happened, so we can all come together to be part of that healing journey. And so the other number I was going to get to, when you come to Black and Brown organizations, and because we're the first, we don't even have numbers to kind of quantify it yet, but historically, Black and Brown organizations get about 6% of their funding from the public. And if any of you are from any big cities like Boston or New York, like you see some of these Black and Brown theater companies and culture organizations, they're always struggling to survive, or they shut down. It's because of that lack of investment from the communities around them. And so this is a big problem. And this is my big push to folks is that, I believe that Native people survive to be the conscience of this country and continue to be the caretakers. And so, I want to really change that number because, we're, the beautiful thing about Ohketeau today is we have funds to pay our artists. That term starving artist is real. Many years of traveling and collecting cans to get some gas money and passing the hat, doing my songs, and yeah, I did it, and I'm glad I did because those are great experiences. But the reality is people need gas. you know, and okay, I got 5 minutes, so I want to, I don't know if I have time. Okay, do we have time to, can I click on those videos? Is that possible? How do I do that? All right. I just want to show a little bit about Ohketeau, and let's see, some of the things that we've done there. Let's see if this works. We have sound too. Oh, no sound. Can you hear that? Oh, we have the sound guys coming. All right, thank you. I caught them off guard. So I'm going to share a little bit about a couple short videos, and then go into a couple more slides, and we're going to talk. So while he's doing that, I just want to continue to say that I said something in my first book. There's a quote that I said there. I says, none of us have the control of what happened in the past. In the same way, none of us can control where we're born, because I had a question asked from an interviewer one time. He said, what are you so proud? What's the proudest part about being Native American? I said, well, nothing. I didn't do this. You know, but what I am proud about is being able to honor my ancestors. I had nothing to do with the color of my skin, the way my hair is, my gender. You know, this was something else. And so, in that same way, you know, but we do have control over how we treat each other. We really do. And so it's our choice. It's our individual choice to show kindness, show compassion, to show understanding, and reach out. Okay.
It's like the scene complicated.
What are you
Complicated, I can't explain.
Time to eat. Goodbye.
Have you children won't stop screaming.
Yeah, give us our people back. Give me my peoples. So that's what you're seeing there. That's all inside of the Ohketeau Cultural Center. We're making a film about our contemporary work and different things that we do. And here's another short video here. Bless you. Oh, wait, what happened here? I gotta choose a browser. Let's see. Let's try this. Oh, here we go. So I don't have time to, where's my clicker? So I wanted to talk a little bit about storytelling, and we're almost out of time. So, so that's a little bit about our center and the different things that we do. And some of the folks you saw there are staff members, culture folks, and double-edged theater folks, and just all of us coming together to have this community collective of the animals there. You know, we have our own chickens, and we're growing our own food, different things like that. And here you see the Nipmuc Farm School sustaining our future. We just had our corn harvest there. You see the kids there. That's my older brother. And so, how do we all heal? I need to do this one. How do we heal? All that stuff. That's some heavy stuff that we're all dealing with. And it's going to take a while, but we need to work together. And this is what we do. Acknowledging each other's pain and past. Recognizing the actions of our past have a direct relationship to how things are today. Take action steps to make changes to better your community and environment. Your community and your environment. Allow space in your heart for an open dialogue to take place. Be willing to challenge your own understanding of how you see things in the world. And the last one is, most importantly, is balance. Balance does not mean everything's going to go your own way. Balance means giving up a little bit. Same way I'm standing here on this floor. I have to have a certain amount of pressure. The floor has a certain amount of pressure to hold me up, or I would fall through. I have to keep my legs steady, or I'm going to go fall. And so this is balance, right? Everybody's like giving a little bit to make something more dynamic. Taking care of the whole, and something I wanted to touch on: mind, physical, spirit, and that's where the healing comes from addictions. And as she mentioned in the opening, you know, we have a curriculum out, free to all educators at Clearinghouse, Circle Tied to Mother Earth, and Coming Home. Those are my books there. These booklets right here are free. Please check them out. There's a lot of great material in there. We're using place-based learning, traditional stories for a path to healing. And I find that we find the best results are happening through that work there. How to get involved: Ohketeau Cultural Center. Support the work that you're seeing. Where, you know, folks who want to become allies, accomplices, you know, friends, partners, go to the website, please, and you'll learn more about the different activities we're doing. Especially, we have some Indigenous People Day events coming up. Youth Council, Nipmuc Cultural Preservation Trust, and we're going to skip that one for now. Skip that, and I'm going to just go right here and say again, you know, this is what you're seeing is the power of resilience. You know, my personal story and changing lives in these young folks who didn't think they'd ever have an opportunity, and that they can learn their culture and excel in academia. You know, where we have these STEM components at Ohketeau as well. You know, getting Native folks in STEM because we're naturally born scientists. You know, getting into the science of astronomy and horticulture and biology, all the things that Indigenous epistemology intakes. So, and again, we're all part of this story, all of us. And so with that, I can keep talking, but I want to get some time in here. I thank you all so much for listening. Kutubadamish, thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. I invite you now to take a seat, join me over in our little living room. We're going to invite up that's right. We're going to invite up two Acton-Boxborough United Way board members who are going to facilitate a little Q&A for us, our interactive portion of the program. So if you have thought of a question that you'd like to ask at this point, please raise your hand and let Maureen know. She'd love to come and bring you a sheet of paper. And so here come Andrew Shen and Vivian Kobusingye Birchall, two of our fantastic board members.
Hi everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces, and Larry, thank you again. I want to give people a little bit of time to write the questions down, so I thought while doing that, I don't know if you would mind, if you could go back to the slide that had to do with the how do we heal. I'd actually love to carve a little bit more space for that. I think at least what was compelling for me was certainly the first part of your presentation. You offer sort of important reminders or introductions to a lot of reasons why members of the Indigenous community, there's a lot of weight on one's shoulders, and certainly good reason why some might say, I'm not prepared to heal or to reconcile, and yet I think you are at a place where you're saying that's the important way forward. So just to start off, like, how do you have a thought as to how one gets to that place where even despite that volume of difficulty, landing in a place of moving forward and healing?
Yeah, I think it takes time and a lot of work of conversation. When I first got sober, and I was like a young 22-year-old, 23 around that time, I was very angry about when I was waking up to all the realities. And I did a lot of protests, I did a lot of marching. I mean, I was doing everything that, you know, an activist would do, but I spent a lot of time angry. And I was making myself physically sick, being with all that anger. And not really letting space in my heart for other people. And so it was a process. It doesn't just, oh, okay, you know. And I think that's an important part for people to recognize. And I'm glad you mentioned it. So it takes a lot of, I'll use the term therapy or counseling, or a lot of trust, you know, that leap of trust that we have to take to begin that journey. And I think, people like myself play a key part in that, as of being this elder Native person, talking to a young 19, 20-year-old saying, they're saying F the world, and I'm saying, no man, there's a better way. And so if I can bring along another person in their 20s and 30s and have that same vision, and then they'll be able to bring another one along. And I think that's how it works. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to dive into culture a little bit. You mentioned the trauma, you know, that Native Americans have faced, and similarly, you know, Black people in this country. And, you know, there are different ways that societies over the years have, you know, different ways that they've used to overcome some of that trauma. So going back to the Native Americans, are there some coping mechanisms that are more cultural that you know of that could be could be adopted in the modern world to, you know, to improve resilience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the great coping mechanisms is our traditional stories. Another thing that we have is laughter as a way of healing. It kind of mitigates the pain. Not laughing through the problem, but finding little spaces of humor in some of the worst situations. I think that's been one of the biggest coping mechanisms, is finding humor in the absurdity of the things that have happened to you. But one of the big coping mechanisms and healing aspects is the stories. That's why they're so crucial, because I say to folks is that everything around us was connected to us, and then that was removed. The skies became Greek, right? All that Greek constellations, we had our own, and the land became speaking English, and our language was taken away, and so we lost our communication, you know, and so that damages down to the soul. And so the stories, connecting back to the land.
So you just mentioned two things that actually there's questions related to it, so I'll ask those two questions. One was, do you have a favorite Nipmuc story or legend? And then secondly, there was a question around language. Has your language been continuously spoken, or was it revived?
Oh, great question. So, do I have a favorite story? As a storyteller, I love all of them because they all do different things for different times. When I'm talking about Matagwas, or Hobomok, or Kankantu, or Musk, the bear, or the gift of the strawberry, or, you know, the stories around harvest. So I think it's depending on the time of year, what story is kind of appropriate. And I think it's the mood that you're in, because sometimes we just tell stories out of laughter, humor. And so it's hard to pick, but usually my name is Crow, is part of my name. So usually the Crow stories, I have more favorite, especially because the Crow has been maligned in Western society. And in our culture, Kankantu, the Crow, he's the shapeshifter. He's the one who travels between life, death, and dreams. He's the storyteller. He's the bringer of corn. And so he has a very dynamic role in our spirituality. And so I always like to lift him up and tell his stories. And also Hobomok too. Because in Native spirituality, we don't have this dichotomy of good and evil. And so the colonists mistaken Hobomok for the devil. But he's a mischievous spirit that he can do bad things, but sometimes he'll do good things, but usually it's by mistake. Because he doesn't have a real intention of harm, it's just, he's gonna do what he feels like. So, yes.
There is a question that is kind of connected to also part of my culture. I'm from Uganda, so one of the communities that was colonized before. So, when you were talking about some of the trauma and the disruption of language, I could relate. But when it comes to managing resilience as a community, the person here asks, is there resilience between boys and girls? Which is, tied into, again, my growing up. I saw the way girls' stress was managed was different from boys. What has been your experience as a Native American?
I got chills from that question because that's a powerful question, and I like that because so what we're seeing now is that and again I can't say that's a very important question because what we're seeing now within our tribe, all the Wampanoag and the Nipmuc folks, we struggle with our boys. For example. If you notice the pictures in most of them, there's some boys, but you'll see more girls. We have more girls who are taking hold of the land because we are a matrilineal society, as it were. But the girls tend to be more adept at staying focused on education, commitment to community, and organizing. And we're struggling with our boys because they seem more susceptible to external forces, whether it's video games, sports, getting into things that they shouldn't. Right now we're struggling with our 20 and 30 something males to get them, to pull them back in to their culture and to help them come along. The girls seem to readily be willing, and so we have some of the girls in their peer group going out, hey, sometimes taking them by the hand, come on, come to the tribe. We have these different activities going on, and so and we worry about them because we know that young men of color are targets many times when they're out there and they're in places that they can potentially be at risk, and so we worry about them.
Here's another question, Larry, and this actually is a shift to questions around the environment. Larry, what advice could you give our town with respect to becoming more environmentally sustainable?
Growing your own food. And if you can't do that, of course, we like to say buy local. Support you have local farmers here. Do a lot of, we're doing a lot of solar, we're getting solar, we're doing composting, talking to the tribal folks who would be Nipmuc, who are of this homeland, to the Nipmuc Farm School is a great source, who are also working with the former Orange Farm School to kind of help protect your environment. And one of the things when I do the environmental talk, I talk about not just the ground, it's what's in the air, the noise pollution, the lack of trees, parking lots creating these hot zones, which is changing the diversity of the plant life, different things like that we run into problems with our water quality and different things. So I think there's some really, we work with the folks in Massachusetts, some really great environmental folks in Massachusetts who have a lot of great ideas about cutting edge science to help us get into that eco-friendly place. Yeah.
A question about the military enlisting. Why do Native Americans enlist in the military at such high rates?
That's a great question, and I did an article about that in Indian Country Today magazine about 10 years ago, and it's a phenomenon I think that goes into many facets. I think the main one is that Indigenous people are always proud to protect their homeland. Secondly, it's an opportunity to gain some funds and get away from a dismal place. The reservations many of them are similar to third world countries. There's a lot of crime, poverty, a lot of addiction going on, and so a lot of Indigenous folks will join the military to kind of get away from all that. This question is I think it's complicated too, from region to region as well. We think about the Navajo code talkers who helped save the war. We think about during the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, as I mentioned. Native Americans were involved heavily, to help shift these conflicts.
I'm going to read the next question, and then hopefully whoever wrote it will be okay if I expand on their question a bit. So I'll read the question first, and then I'll expand. What do you think of the show, if you've seen it, Reservation Dogs, stories from the reservation with all native actors? And more broadly, just curious if you've seen any observations from yourself about, when you talk about common memory and how people understand certain themes and messages, the role of popular culture and how they shape sort of a narrative around especially marginalized communities. I think, wondering, have you seen any change or lack of change in terms of how popular culture sort of elevates or continues to sort of box in Indigenous voices?
Wow, well, I've seen it, and most of the people in that show I know personally. And I am just thrilled about Reservation Dogs. I love it. And my partner, who's not native from here, I kind of like curate it for her. As, like when they cuckoo house the owl when they're hiding the eyes. That's one of the taboos around our culture here. So I really love the show. And I think it's like I said, I'm seeing things now I thought I would never see. I'm seeing native people in primetime television. And by the way, Canada's been doing this already, like with stations like APTN. It's great to see US finally come on board. It's a proud moment that people get an inside look at how we can be funny, how you're seeing the trauma all at once. I think my book, Morning Road to Thanksgiving, kind of did a lot of that as well. And as far as boxing folks in, again, I try to be this bridge builder in many ways, because, and I tell folks, if you talk to Native folks, everybody's individuals, you're going to get different ideas. But I try to, when it comes to allies and folks supporting us, I try to give a wide berth, as it were, because I know folks they know nothing of Indigenous people. And so they make a lot of mistakes and they say things they shouldn't. And folks get offended and nobody talks for weeks, right? And so, and I've been there, and I know how that is, but when folks are sincere, and as I mentioned, really willing to listen, and then there's that opportunity to expand on your knowledge. Oh, I didn't know I couldn't say that. Okay, now I understand, now I get it. Like, now I see why you don't like that mascot, or saying when we're having a gathering, we're going to a powwow at an office meeting, now I see why that's offensive. So these are the kind of dialogues that we need to expand on our relationship to each other. Reservation Dogs.
Reservation Dogs.
So you just mentioned the magic word, mascots, because the question I have right in front of me is about mascots. So what is the person asks, what is the Indigenous community's opinion of the choice of colonials for a mascot or a team name? And just to give you a little bit of a background in case you didn't know, the town of Acton-Boxborough High School, the school right now where we are, is in the process of changing the mascot from colonials to another name. So again, the question, what is your opinion on the choice of colonials?
I think that's a good idea. I think one of my favorite scholars, Robin Chandler, once said that mascots are a form of visual terrorism. They are a reminder that we have not only control of our land, but not even our own bodies or our own images. And so I am really grateful. The only issue I have around that is the fact that one of my tribal folks, Brittany Wally, she's on the Massachusetts Mascot Commission for Change. And so we've been going town to town to help, initiate change and understanding and awareness about these art. And it's exhausting to try to prove your humanity to people. We shouldn't have to be doing the heavy lifting. And when we realize that insert any other ethnic or racial group, and you wouldn't be able to do it. You just couldn't. There'll be lawsuits. So why is it okay for Native people to be in this minstrel show like buffoonery, and we're in this perpetual state of anger, or that's like this flat emotional image that are perpetuated of us, and so it's very troubling, and so I'm really appreciative that we are making this shift, that it's not good to have humans, especially Indigenous people, where we have very little understanding of the culture, which is shameful in itself, that they're the original folks here, that we know very little. When I've traveled to Sweden, I was in Iceland, they know more about Indigenous folks than folks here. They're rattling off history. I said, yeah, I wish folks back home knew this, So.
Next question I have has sort of focused around this idea of living one's values. And so I certainly want to go back to at the beginning of this, Katie did a land acknowledgement. You've mentioned how here in Acton-Boxborough we're actually on Nipmuc land. We just built, for many who know, we've just built a brand new school building that houses 3 of our schools, the preschool and 2 elementary schools. And as part of that plan, with the grand opening in about a week, there's going to be a plaque that is a land acknowledgement, which I think on one hand is sort of an important symbolic gesture, but I guess I would be curious from your perspective, beyond symbolic gestures of acknowledgements which have value, what would you say would be something that you would hope would be a demonstration of living those values? Whether in a school setting or just in a community value, beyond sort of acknowledging what is there, how does one then live that, or sort of move forward things that you think are important to move forward?
Yeah, right. So we do a lot of consulting with towns and different organizations for land acknowledgements, and I think the most important thing is to have action steps, intentional steps, so it's not performative, and it becomes like real things that you can do with your hands and your body, in your position, in your privilege, in your leverage, whatever that may be. To take that to make change for the Indigenous folks that have been harmed through colonialism, and so that plaque has real meaning to it. I think that's the most crucial thing, to get involved, and so it's that it matters.
So if there were 1 or 2 things that you would ask the community to sort of consider as part of living that values, is there anything that comes top of mind for you?
The best thing to do, wherever I travel, I say work local, work with the tribe. And one of the things that a lot of activists like to do, and allies rather, is say, what does the tribe do? Where can I jump in? How can I help? And it's always about centering that Indigenous voice, where it's been so marginalized for so long. So come in and say, where can I help? Where can I put my resources, or I have this land that you can come and harvest, or and make yourself available in that way. And we're seeing such reciprocity. It's such a beautiful thing to see when I see allies and Native people, and the enjoyment from both sides. It's such a healing process, and so I think that's where it's happening. And Acton being on Nipmuc homelands, there's Ohketeau, there's our Nipmuc Tribal Council to work with, and other Nipmuc folks who are doing rematriation and different things like that. So I asked the student body to reach out to those folks, and because they're here, they're doing so many wonderful things.
The next question, it begins with a statement. I appreciated the quote about having a shared understanding about history. I've been challenged to bring disparate histories together. Can you share how we might bring those histories together?
We can bring it together by telling the truth. And telling some of the stuff that's really right in plain view. The Declaration of Independence calls Indians merciless savages. Like 20 lines down from We the People. And nobody talks about that. America has never reconciled for the genocide and slavery that happened here. And some of the history that I mentioned here. And going to school here was like, in Massachusetts, was the worst time of my life growing up. And I remember Elder telling me, this is really horrible, because as a child you should be having the time of your life. And it was the worst, I recall sitting in classroom and nothing mentioned about me. There was nobody who looked like me. And I just felt, that I was just had this proximity to who had the knowledge, and I was just there as this blurb, as it were, and the teachers and so on. And so we need to make the education system commensurate. And not only that, beyond my 70s and 80s growing up, like right now in 2022, as we move into 2023, this country is far more diverse. And the education system curriculum was developed during colonial period. It's not commensurate to who the teachers are talking to. So they're bumbling through some of these texts that have no real objective meaning in terms of what's really happening with the science, of the sociology, of the diversity of the country. And so they're trying to figure that all out, and it's like fun watching them squirm. But that's why we're here, right? To help that along.
If we could drill into that a bit in terms of education, the classroom. Let's say you're having a conversation with a classroom teacher who there's a real enthusiasm on their part. They're moved by some of what you're encouraging in terms of trying to incorporate and create space for storylines and narratives that haven't been centered in the classroom. And yet, the sheer volume of that could be paralyzing to somebody. Where do I begin? So if you were to have somebody say to you, there's so much that we could try and include or start, I'm not sure where to start. If there was one thing, either a topic or a theme or a takeaway that you would encourage them or want them to start with, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's the place that you would have them start?
Oh, I love that. That's perfect. This is a really important question. I love that because I would say start from the living presence. Start with the people who are in front of you and talk to them and learn about what they got going on. Because the history, it could be daunting, as I said. But talk to those young ladies out there doing rematriation, the elders, the culture keepers, the indigenous scholars who are alive today, about what they have going on. Our plight right now of getting land returned, or growing our own food, or helping our youth around drug and alcohol prevention using our traditional stories. Start from today and work your way back. And one of the things as a historian myself, a lot of times we get caught up in indigenous folks. We start around 1491 or so, but there's thousands of years of culture and history that has taken place here that we don't talk about, that needs to be thoroughly investigated, because there's a lot of traditional educational knowledge that has that healing power. So I think the best place is to start with the living people who are alive today, all these survivors, because they have quite the story to tell, and then work your way back.
Two related questions. First is, were you given the name Spotted Crow at birth? And then second, where is the cultural center and is it open to the public?
I was given the name, so Nipmuc people, and this used to really confuse the colonists, we get 3 names in our life. You get a name when you're a baby, a child, and you get a name as a young adult, and you get a name when you're an elder. In this instance, I got a name when I became sober at 21, and I became Ohketeau the crow with spots, and the spots represent the healing and the protection. And so that was when that name came to me. And there's a second question?
About the center, is it open to the public?
The center is open for tours for the public. It has a very different facets to it that we do there. Education, workshops, we do tours, and we have different schools come in. And just to back up a little bit too about, we were mentioning about the curriculum. That's where my residency came into play with Buckfield Community College, where across the spectrum of studies from humanities to science to chemistry to music, we're finding spaces to enter Indigenous epistemology. But if I didn't say that the center is in Ashfield, Massachusetts, and we can set up, contact us, we can set up visits and different things like that. So yes.
Final question for you, if that's okay. And I'm going to relate this question to also one of the bullet points on the slides. The first bullet point is acknowledging each other's pain and past. And then you had mentioned a little bit earlier in the response just the tendency that oftentimes we'll find ourselves in where perhaps someone says something where the intent might be different than the impact, and then we don't talk to each other for weeks, as you said. So this is the question, how do you create a safe space for people to share stories? Or how do you create safe space for people to exchange sort of pain and other sort of vulnerabilities in a way that allows people to move forward or heal?
That's a great question. And we've done that a few different ways. For example, let me get this title correct. The Western Mass Coalition of Churches held a Truth and Reconciliation conference that I was a part of. I think it's on YouTube. You can find my talk there. And one of the things that allowed it to be a place of healing and safe is that they said, we don't have the authority to lead this conversation, because of the church's complicity in boarding schools and in the history of what happened here. And so when they shifted that and said, Indigenous people are going to lead this conversation, it opened up a breath of fresh air and opened up the opportunity to feel agency in that space where, okay, we're in control and you're here to listen. And so by folks taking that stance in terms of we're here to listen, and that creates that kind of environment of safe space. And I think, secondly, in other spaces, we need to really have to be careful. People need to be coming in with an open mind and understanding of what's going to take place. I think it's important to have kind of a procedural setting where folks have procedures. You'll speak and I'll listen, or there'll be a round table, because these are heavy things, and this is why any counselors in here or social workers, there's certain questions you don't ask somebody if you're not prepared to deal with that answer, right? And so this is why when we're dealing with truth and reconciliation, you're dealing with a lot of trauma. Things are going to come up. So we have people on hand who are counselors, maybe grief consultants and things like that. I think those are important.
So we are out of time. I feel I'm going to say I'm fairly comfortable in speaking on behalf of the audience and thank you again. If you'll join me in thanking everyone listening.